As soon as I could peek over the counter, I was starting to get to know people experiencing food and housing insecurity at a free Saturday breakfast service. My family started volunteering together at this breakfast service 11 years ago and continue to do it to this day. Through all this time, I naturally developed deep relationships with the people I saw through the years. I gained a deeper understanding of the struggles they were going through and saw them not as a result of their individual failures, but as a series of unfortunate situations, people, problems that never allowed them to fully recover. I didn't know a lot about how to help them or what they needed or what kind of systematic or structural problems were stopping them from economic stability. However, I knew I was frustrated that the food that I gave them only filled their stomachs for a few hours. It didn't change their need to come back. For years, I saw the same people over and over and over. And in a way that was positive because they created community there and got to know one another. But in most ways, I saw this as a negative. It meant that there were still barriers to the ability to pay for food and housing. There were still needs that weren't changing just because they got one free breakfast. I was eager to do more, but I didn't know how. Student involvement in housing insecurity needs 3 branches: empathy, education, and action. At the University of Kentucky, where I attend school, 92% of students do not know what it's like to be housing insecure. In order to work towards a student body that doesn't allow 8% of its peers to experience housing insecurity, we need people to care and understand what it is and how to act against it. I went through my own journey to understand what housing insecurity meant and caring about the folks without housing in my community. Through a reflection of my own story, starting at that breakfast ministry, I have focused on where to create opportunities for other students to go on their own development of empathy to action. As I entered into college, one of the easiest decisions I made was continuing to learn more about this community in a club then called National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week, or NHA for short. At the time, the whole role of this club was to host educational events on campus once a year in November. The director, Bo, and I had different plans and bigger plans for our student organization. Following NHA that year, I started a mentorship program for University of Kentucky students to go out to elementary schools to work with kids experiencing housing insecurity. While I knew that I didn't know very much, I knew that starting at a place of empathy was what students needed. I had experienced these friendships with these people at home, and it made me care deeply about them. I knew for students to care, they needed somebody to care about. There were key components to this mentorship program. It started with weekly engagement with the kids at the schools. That could look like homework help, a safe place to play, a time for reading together. It was important that the volunteers knew they were in for a commitment. Many people had come in and out of these elementary kids' lives, and we were not going to add to that trauma. So the volunteers knew that they were making a commitment for a year to be there every single week. I also made sure that they understood that they had to be there for educational events on every month. We brought local service providers in to talk about what these kids were experiencing and what was happening. We saw this as necessary background for our mentors to serve the kids better. My first semester when we did that, we had just 8 college students going to 4 schools. And now we regularly have over 20 college students going to 8 to 10 different schools, in addition to a few programs going to other nonprofits. In the 5 semesters of this program, we've gotten better at the education and reflection to encourage our students to look and think about the systematic barriers that our mentees are facing. Around the same time I started the mentorship program, Bo and I were asked by the City of Lexington's Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention to look into youth homelessness in Lexington. As we both knew how much information we lacked, we started making meetings with anyone we could think of. At the end of each meeting, we would ask who else should we be meeting with and set up some more meetings. For almost 2 years we did this, going from service provider to city official to person experiencing homelessness and asking them about what they knew, where the holes were, what was happening in Lexington. Bo and I found a unique gap for 18 to 24-year-olds. In adult shelters, they weren't getting the age-appropriate care that was forgiving of their impulsivity. Many times, we would hear that 18 to 24-year-olds would make rash decisions or react to triggers of past trauma. In age-appropriate care, The response to this would be dealt with by understanding that past trauma and making accommodations instead of kicking them out for periods of 2 weeks to life, like adult shelters will do in Lexington. As we learned more about this and the unique problems that were happening at the University of Kentucky, our interest in changing the system to better serve the people grew. At the University of Kentucky, 42% of students are food insecure and 8% are housing insecure. Bo was especially moved by this and headed a basic needs campaign that successfully organized students experiencing food and housing insecurity to change the support systems at UK. After meetings and direct action, the Basic Needs campaign was able to get a professional staff person who serves as the Basic Needs Coordinator. The Basic Needs Coordinator is available for students to come to talk and has access to a Basic Needs Fund, which can give microgrants to students in need. As Bo and I continued to learn about the homelessness in Lexington, our research increasingly focused on the lack of funding that causes communities to compete for ever-dwindling funds. A report by Western Regional Advocacy Project presents the data perfectly. In 1978, the funding for housing and urban development, the federal government board that designates money to local communities, was over $83 billion. Today, the annual McKinney Homeless Assistance Fund has never been over $1.4 billion. With $80 billion less to work with, public housing has decreased in construction and maintenance, which has resulted in the elimination of 1.2 million less affordable housing units since 1993. While there are many reasons people experience homelessness, without affordable housing units, there's no systematic way to end homelessness. As I continue to learn more about systematic injustices that perpetuate homelessness, I'm still trying to figure out how to best address these injustices. Currently, I'm working with a group of 7 other young adults in a project called Canopy Young Adult Community. In the past 7 months, we have shifted our focus a few times, and as we learn more and talk to more people experiencing housing insecurity, we've changed what we want to do. Even though we've changed these goals, I think having the humility to listen to people with more experience and the attention to see that a new focus is necessary will build a foundation that works in the future. As college campuses, we have the responsibility to involve our student bodies in the action against systematic homelessness. As we cultivate student leaders against housing insecurity and homelessness, we first need to provide opportunities to grow in empathy. Volunteering is a great place to start, but it cannot be the conclusion of university involvement. There is also the responsibility to educate with humility. We need to show students how to use their empathy to dive deeper into their knowledge of systematic, not individual, flaws that perpetuate homelessness. Finally, we need to inspire them to act with courage against systems of oppression. This is the part that is the most difficult, especially for me, and I know for others. This courage takes risk, and risk is what we need to make enough change. Thank you.